Welcome to Black in the City of London. Today we speak about unforgotten lives, about histories neglected in and around the City of London, and London more widely. My name is Jonathan Goddard, and I am an educator and creative type. So far in this series, I've had the privilege of speaking to academics and curators about the West India Docks, the Museum of London's coverage of slavery, and the lives and writings of Sancho Equiano and Francis Barber. In this and the next episode, we are delving into the lives of those who have been less celebrated by the mainstream currents of historical analysis. This week, I talked to Howard Doble, the senior archivist at the London Metropolitan Archive, about the exhibition that they have put on at the archive itself and the characters that figure in the exhibition, some of whom you'll be familiar with and others who may surprise you with their stories. We also talk about how it is possible for you to be involved in their work, uncovering the stories of those in the past that have been hitherto undiscovered.
Black in the City of London.
Unforgotten Lives is the current free exhibition at London Metropolitan Archives. It opened in April this year, and it's running until the end of March 2024. And basically, the exhibition presents the stories of Londoners of African, Caribbean, Asian, and Indigenous heritage who worked and lived in the capital between 1560 and 1860. And it's using a mixture of original documents, digitized images, sound recordings, timelines, and contextual information.
This is Howard Doble, the senior archivist of the London Metropolitan Archive, talking about the Unforgotten Lives exhibition.
And I guess the one major aim of the exhibition is to smash a big myth about the diversity of London's populations and that they're the results of post-Second World War migration. The exhibition shows us that the presence of people of colour in London predates this by at least 500 years and almost certainly more. And it shows that Londoners of colour have been ever present in pretty much all aspects of London life since Tudor times. And while this is nothing new, scholars and activists have been researching these histories in archives for decades. Sadly, it feels as though this exhibition is all too relevant today. Only last week, actually, I read a survey commissioned by the Bloomsbury Publishing, which indicated that more than half of Britons know so little about Black British history that they cannot name a single historical figure, and only 7% could name more than 4, which clearly shows that this research is still being neglected, marginalised, and excluded from mainstream British history. So Unforgotten Lives is about paying homage to this research. It's about raising the profile of these histories, and not as specialist history or niche history, but celebrating the centrality and importance of people of colour in shaping the history of London and Britain. So specifically, the exhibition is based around the stories of 50 or so individuals who appear in the archives held at LMA. It was almost impossible to decide who to pick from the thousands of people identified, and we've only really scratched the surface.
Walking up to the Unforgotten Lives exhibition is fascinating. As you climb the stairs, you can read a dizzying assortment of quotes, facts, and nuggets of information that attest to the experiences of global majority people in the city, Greater London, and across the UK. The English, who had never before seen a man of Hindustan dressed in the manner I was, encounter me a great curiosity, says Mohammed Ibtisam Uddin. We begged for some time. At last my brother, his name is Aaron, got to clean knives and forks at a slap bang, which means an eating house, in the city. He is doing very well. This here is the testimony of an unnamed destitute man in Whitechapel, identified as a person of African heritage, in a book called London Labour and London Poor in 1861.
On one level, we just wanted to present interesting stories of London life, so stories people could engage with, which reflect the diversity of experience and circumstance. So we encounter servants, princes, sailors, soldiers, diplomats, writers, poets and publishers, activists and abolitionists, musicians and performers, entrepreneurs, traders and skilled artisans. So both the remarkable and the everyday, and their lives showcase stories of love, family, status, resistance, discrimination, poverty, wealth, and work. So very familiar themes. But it should be said, by focusing on individuals, we didn't want to ignore the context of these lives. When we start asking why so many of the people identified in the records might have ended up in London, we inevitably begin to examine London's historical links to colonialism and enslavement. And although colonialism was not the sole reason for the people presented in the exhibition being in London during our period, it played a significant role. And it's possibly an obvious point, but the exhibition makes clear that the global nature of London's history and development. Colonialism wasn't something that just happened overseas. It was experienced on the streets of London. And I think London was transformed both directly and indirectly by the wealth and power generated through enslavement and colonialism. And its history cannot be separated from these colonial links. In many respects, its populations were just one visible embodiment of these links. And the history is everywhere if you choose to see it.
So I wanted to find out from Howard where this information had come from, how it was uncovered, and how much of it was permanently housed at the LMA.
At LMA, we look after over 100 kilometres of shelving, packed full of records covering 1,000 years of London's history. Our oldest document is from 1067, and we care for these records so that anyone who's interested can come and look at them. We're open to the public and we're free to use. So the stories featured in the exhibition all come from this huge body of records. The exhibition gave us a chance to really delve into the records. It was a real privilege to work on it. But actually, it all started with a single series of records. And in fact, the idea for the exhibition emerged from a previous volunteer-led project begun in the 2000s, which focused on searching the Anglican parish registers of baptism, marriage and burial in our care. And LMA holds many thousands of these parish records. And the idea was to identify references to people of colour and to create a database of their names from the registers. And now lockdown in 2020 gave us the opportunity to revisit this project. Technologies had developed, allowing the data to be embedded with our online catalogue. The scope of the project was broadened, images were included, more contextual information was provided around the register entries, and issues of language and terminology were discussed. And the timing wasn't really coincidental. The murder of George Floyd in May 2020, the Black Lives Matter protests and the toppling of the statue of Colston in June 2020 generated debate in the heritage sector, and they sparked conversations about how particular histories are privileged and others are marginalised by our work. About how we frame knowledge, about decolonizing our collections, and how archives can promote racial and social justice and greater inclusivity. So the idea kind of that we could be activist archivists, if you like.
Post-2020, there has clearly been a shift in the attitudes of many institutions in their willingness to confront uncomfortable legacies and democratize access to their archives and previously closely guarded knowledge. It is so encouraging to see exhibitions like this being curated in official spaces. It is clear that the watershed that occurred after the death of George Floyd encouraged many organizations to revivify existing programs that aim to bring social justice into such heritage spaces.
Black in the City of London.
So we relaunched the dataset under a new name, which was Switching the Lens, in November 2020. And the new name the idea was to encapsulate this new approach. It was a clear acknowledgement that we choose what aspects of history we focus on, and that sometimes we need to switch the lens to refocus, and that the evidence for the presence of people of colour is everywhere if you look, and nowhere if you don't. So as part of the relaunch, we researched some of the lives to explore what information could be found from other sources. We wanted to piece together stories so that these were not just names on pages or in databases. And so the idea from the exhibition really came from this work. It's the idea of expanding this research and presenting some of the stories of Londoners of African, Caribbean, Asian and Indigenous heritage over a 300-year period. I know I keep coming back to it, but it's important to reiterate that these histories have always been present. You know, they've always been here. Little of this is new, and it is really important to emphasize that. And we've actually used the term rediscovering in the exhibition subtitle to embrace the fact that this history has always been present. This exhibition simply pays homage to this huge body of research and hopefully raises its profile, but it couldn't have happened without it. And we definitely wanted to steer clear of the idea of uncovering forgotten or hidden history, because neither statement is accurate. This exhibition shows that these histories are in plain sight in the archival record if you care to look. So they're not hidden. And far from being forgotten, these histories have been researched extensively and celebrated by scholars and activists for decades. So we began with all this fantastic research and we applied it to the wealth of sources held at London Metropolitan Archive to see basically where we could go. And the range of records is amazing. I mean, we're spoiled for choice in that respect. You'll find parish registers, church wardens' accounts, records of civic government, court records, family papers, electoral registers, land taxation records, probate material, business records, published journals, and prints and maps on display in the exhibition. So it's a wealth of information.
The exhibition tells a story that speaks of characters both named and nameless, some with colourful stories and personas, some who embody a mundanity that still remains evocative of lives lived in the streets and districts we still frequent. There is Reasonable Black Man, the Southwark silk weaver, a black independent business owner at the tail end of the 16th century. Black Man was possibly survived by a son who carried on this business in Stepney. We learn about Fanny Eaton, the Jamaican woman that modelled for artists who exhibited in the Royal Academy in the 19th century. Her features were used as a model for a range of ethnicities, her depiction in art symbolising the essentialisation that the status of being another provides. Although her face remains famous, Fanny Eaton's thoughts and words remain a mystery to us. We see Wedderburn, who was imprisoned in the Giltspur prison in the city, the Unitarian preacher who called for revolution against the slave trade in the early 19th century, imploring the peoples of Jamaica and Britain to revolt, linking working class rights to calls for the end of the slave trade. There is Anne Duck, a career criminal like Wedderburn of mixed heritage, whose family hail from near Chancery Lane. She became involved with a gang from around Clerkenwell, and her crimes increased in seriousness until she was hanged in 1744 as part of a mob who attacked the head borough of Clerkenwell, a parish official for the area. Many of those who were featured in the exhibition, such as Sancho and Equiano, were resident outside the City of London. However, they carried out many of their activities in the city itself. I wanted to find out from Howard whether there were any figures featured in the exhibition who were resident in the square mile itself.
I mean, there are lots of examples of people of colour who lived in the City of London. And when we say the City of London, we're talking about the ancient square mile. The city itself, despite being a small geographic area, was the very heart of London from medieval times, and increasingly obviously became the heart of an expanding empire. The city included hundreds of parish churches, so it's not surprising that approximately 1,000 of the people so far identified by our Switching the Lens project appear in the registers from the City of London parishes. That's about a third of the total of the 3,500 entries so far found by the project. And quite a few of these people feature in the exhibition. In fact, our oldest entry so far identified comes from the city. A man called John is baptised at the Church of St Mary the Virgin Aldermanbury on the 6th of May 1565. And we know next to nothing about John. Sadly, he's buried in the same church practically a year to the day in May 1566, but we have no surname for him, no parents, no age. The only thing that the parish clerk records about him in the register is that he's a person of colour. The language suggests possible African heritage, but we don't know for sure. But as our earliest entry found so far, John's appearance in the parish register for 1565 is really, really important. I think if we were to ask people what comes to mind when you think about Elizabethan London, I suspect the diversity of its populations would not figure highly on the list, yet John is clear evidence of this fact. There are many other city examples in the exhibition. We feature the case of John Saysher, a joiner who applies for the city freedom in 1731. There's Anne Vors and her husband Anthony, who was a royal trumpeter, living in St Botolph Aldgate in 1618. There's Mary Phyllis, a woman from Morocco, who's baptised in the same parish in 1597. And also Catherine Orker and Edward Francis, who both lived in St Catherine by the Tower in the 1690s and both took their employers to court. And that's just to name a few. But as London expanded in the 17th and 18th centuries and new residential areas developed, such as fashionable Marylebone, which was built with new money made through enslavement and colonialism, then we find that the spread of entries expands across the Greater London area. But as you say, many activities took place within the city itself. A number of our stories take place in the city courts, the Old Bailey, the Guildhall, and city jails. Olaudah Equiano, Phyllis Wheatley, and Mary Prince all had their books published by city publishers. Jonathan Strong and James Somerset, who challenged racism in landmark court cases in the 1760s and 1770s, have strong city connections. Radical activist Robert Wedderburn was imprisoned in Giltspur Street Jail in 1831. And one of the earliest documented references to people of colour in London is to be found in descriptions of Catherine of Aragon's household as they processed along Cheapside in the city in 1501. So the city features very, very, very strongly. So much so, actually, that we were able to create a city walking tour inspired by the exhibition. We chose a relatively small area of the city to show how even in the smallest of neighbourhoods, references to the histories of Londoners of colour abound. And again, these histories are everywhere if you care to look for them, and nowhere if you don't.
The exhibition deals with issues that may resonate with some who have been in the city more recently, including the process of erasure by renaming. Many of the people of colour referred to in the archive's material are recorded under anglicised versions of their names. Finding faces to match these names is even rarer. We learn of life, love and loss, death and destitution through the archive materials presented in the exhibition. There is the Geronimi family, married in February of 1613. Their son Josiah being baptised at the same church, St. Botolph's Aldgate, in September of the same year. Thomas Geronimi apparently dies at sea while working for the East India Company, leaving his widow, Helen, to seek financial assistance. Ira Aldridge's exploits on the stage are paid tribute to, the same Ira Aldridge that entranced audiences from here to Russia with his unique portrayals, including an Othello that motivated the critic Durelin to say that there was no point in a white actor trying to play the role again. The characters in the exhibition are both familiar and unfamiliar. It's a real mix. As well as learning about people's personal lives, we learn about the world of work and how that intersected with the City of London's administration, particularly in the case of John Sacher.
Yeah, so John Sacher, he approaches the Court of Aldermen in 1731, asking to be made a freeman of the City of London. And he was perfectly entitled to do so. He'd actually served a 7-year apprenticeship to become a joiner, and we have his original apprenticeship indenture, and that's on show in the exhibition. And the reason why John would want to gain the city freedom, which, as I say, was his right to do so, was so that he could set up a business within the city walls and employ his own or take on his own apprentices. We know a little bit about John because of the records of the Court of Aldermen, and they record something of John's background whilst they're making the decision about whether to grant him the freedom. And we find out that John was originally born in Barbados in 1689, that he was enslaved there by a man called Thomas Gerard. Thomas Gerard was a city merchant, and he had property in the City of London and in Enfield. And when John was aged 2 years old, Gerard decides to come back to London, and he brings John with him. Now, we don't know what the relationship was between John and Thomas Gerard, but some scholars have suggested that John might have been his son. We know nothing about John's early life in London. We don't know where he was living. We find him first in the records of his baptism in one of the city churches in 1717, and then that allows him to be taken on as an apprentice with a joiner. John serves the apprenticeship. He becomes a member of the Joiners' Company, one of the City of London livery companies. And the reason why we think that there's a good chance that Thomas Gerard might be John's father is that Thomas Gerard seems to have been very involved in getting John this apprenticeship. He also leaves John some money when he dies. By then, John is married and has a child. So let's go back to the 1731, and John approaches the city alderman asking to be made free, and they discuss it, and the decision is that he is to be made free. There's no real reason why he shouldn't be made free. He's served his apprenticeship. That's what you have to do. He's a member of a livery company, and so he's entitled to be granted the city freedom. Indeed, he gets it. But 7 days later, the city aldermen reconvene, and the records state that they discuss the case of John Sacher, And the consequences are devastating, because they decide that from this day onwards, there's a proclamation to state that no black person should be allowed to be made free of any of the livery companies from this date onwards. And that, in effect, is barring black people from gaining the freedom of the City of London. Now, we don't think that his freedom was taken away from him, so he probably retained his freedom of the city. We found him in some land tax records, and he does have property in the City of London. So the suggestion is that perhaps he has set up his business. We think we've also found his burial record, which is actually very close to us here at LMA in the Church of St James Clerkenwell. And if that is in fact John Sacher, then his last known address is on this very site of the building I'm sitting in today. It's actually on the site of the archive, which is quite a strange coincidence. The Sacher story really, it shows the institutionalizing of racism, and shows how precarious life was for black people in 1730s London.
So I wanted to ask Howard whether there are any plans to make a more permanent version of the exhibition, and how those who have an interest in these issues can access the LMA resources and events to learn more about Black history in the City of London.
The exhibition only runs until the end of March 2024, but we have already started discussing possible legacy. Got a few ideas. We're thinking perhaps a virtual kind of online exhibition. We'd like to kind of film some of our colleagues talking about their favourite stories. We're preparing presentations on content for future outreach talks. We'll be recording curators' tours, obviously featuring stories on our website, possibly developing a schools pack, which would be great. Also, there's a possibility of developing a travelling exhibition, and it would be great, if possible, to develop that into a kind of a package which possibly could be sort of, sent around kind of to various places. I mean, in some respects, the most exciting thing about the exhibition really is that it feels like this is only the very beginning. The Switching the Lens project will certainly continue. We've an ever-growing team of volunteers. New entries are being added to the data set all the time.
So what kind of people can volunteer, and how do they get involved?
A lot of this material has been digitized. So, it's a case of kind of looking at digitized images of parish registers. We would give a lot of help there and assistance. So really, it's about a passion. It's about wanting to do it. I think that's the main thing. I mean, you can learn all of these skills, and we're very happy to share them. I mean, there are details on our website. Anybody interested can contact us. At the moment, Switching the Lens is concentrating on parish registers, but once those have been exhausted, there are new collections which can be identified. So I mean, hopefully that will be an ongoing, process. And in actual fact, I mean, the wealth of information found researching Unforgotten Lives suggests that we really have only scratched the surface. For every story that we presented here, there was another which we had to overlook. And for many of these lives, there are multiple questions which kind of remain unanswered. I mean, these are fragments of lives, if you like, and they await further research.
Visiting the exhibition really illustrates the breadth of the Black experience in antiquity. And it would be a wonderful outcome if there was a digital version of this that lived on as its legacy.
A major aim of this exhibition was definitely to inspire conversation and discussion. We set up a reflection zone in our information area to encourage visitor responses to the exhibition and provide further reading around the displays. We definitely want to inspire further research, to inspire people to engage with London's history in all its complexity and diversity. We're open to the public Monday to Thursday, one Saturday a month. We're free to use. You don't need an appointment. You simply register for a history card. That's like having a library card, and then you'll literally have access to 1,000 years of London's history. There's a whole host of information on our website. The catalogue to all the collections we hold is available to search online, and staff are always on hand to help, both in the public rooms and as part of our remote inquiry service. Switching the Lens, the data set is available to search online from our catalogue, and we're adding data to it all the time, as I said. If you do want to be a volunteer, details, again, they're on our website. And finally, we've got a programme of events relating to the exhibition too. So check out our Eventbrite page. These include curator tours, private views, and talks. And past events have included, as I said, an Unforgotten Lives inspired walking tour of the city. We've had a conference on Black publishing, symposium on Black Lives in the Archives. Most recently, actor Patterson Joseph performed his show Sancho and Me at LMA, which was absolutely amazing. And excitingly, as I say, our 3 artists will be exhibiting their pieces alongside the exhibition in the coming weeks. So there's lots and lots to engage with.
Thanks to Howard Doble and the staff at the London Metropolitan Archive for their help with this episode. In next week's episode, we will look at the lives of those who escaped from slavery in the city in the 17th and 18th centuries, studying the stories of those who broke free in this country and went on to live lives in spite of the manner of their arrival. Black in the City of London is now on Instagram too. You can follow Black in the City of London or go to blackinthecity.uk for more details of future episodes and events. You can also find the show notes there. Black in the City of London is partly funded by a grant from the Barbican's Community Engagement Team. New episodes drop weekly on a Thursday.